We're live.
I'm gonna go re-put to sleep.
Much love. Appreciate you. Director of Ops, Chels. So let's keep that train of thought. Well, this will be our kickoff because I've toyed with this concept. I've been talking about this a little bit more publicly now, but now and I think we're not gonna tell the Marts what we were just going into, because I'm gonna feed you.
Okay.
We'll dive into this thought. But I think that I look at America now, and we're in my friend and I call it the information era, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're in this information era, and we think that is training us into this intuitive age. So that's kind of the positive, optimistic side of what that information could do. But the thing is that you were just talking about the power of story.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you said this word, but I kind of tuned you out because I wanted to ask you this question to get us rolling. But if you think about the information era and how much information we have, and you promote and you have a lot of information that you share, but you just before we were just talking about moving the needle here
Mm-hmm.
and changing minds. And what's fascinating about that is if we have all this information now and we are unhealthy, or
Mm-hmm.
we have disease, or we have all these issues, but we have the information, how does the needle not get moved? And the way I'm understanding is because we don't know how to attach emotion to information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I paused before we pressed start, because you and I were just getting ready to go.
Okay. Have we pressed start?
Well, we're on.
Oh, we're okay.
Thomas Seager, let it rip.
then I have some things to say.
Yeah.
The first fallacy is that data is not information. We live in a world of big data, and we're collecting data from everything. But just having measurements does not constitute information. I learned from Claude Shannon, whose master's thesis at MIT invented computer programming. So this is a creative genius that we're talking about. Claude Shannon said that information is a change in probability assignment. So information, not the same as data. Information is when your expectations about the world change as the result of the data. Great. But information is not knowledge, because a change in probability assignment doesn't allow you to apply the information. So for information to become knowledge, you must be able to put the information to work to get more of what you want out of the world.
Wow.
Knowledge is not wisdom, because you might have the knowledge to put this information to work, to make a change in the world, but it doesn't tell you what change to make. So you got to go from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. Nowhere along that hierarchy does really emotion come into play. It's a very sterile way of thinking about data, or even about
info.
wisdom.
Yeah.
People don't change their minds or make their decisions because they're human beings along this hierarchy. They are motivated by feelings and emotions. So you might want to be stoic, and you might want to take all of your emotions and your feelings out of it because you admire stoic philosophy. And I think you're shutting yourself off from information. Your feelings are there, and you can observe them and say, now I have data about my feelings. How does the data that I feel angry, I feel sad, I feel glad, I feel afraid? And then you could say, now that you have that data, you could lift it up to information. What about this situation, it makes me more likely to feel these kinds of things? You can move that up to knowledge. What am I going to do with all these feelings? And then how do I want to feel when this kind of thing happens or that kind of thing happens? So I think that Stoicism gets exaggerated or maybe misunderstood as like the subtraction of emotions, which would be a mistake. I would much rather have a deeper understanding of the emotions to be able to live emotionally at this level of wisdom rather than just at some like data observational experiential level, without saying, what are these emotions trying to tell me, and what are the emotions I want to have?
So do you think as we climb up the hierarchy of that, do you think that we acquire our own emotions?
There's a book called The Courage to be Disliked.
Okay.
It's about Adlerian psychology. So there's all these great psychologists that come from Vienna, Freud,
Yeah.
and, Viktor Frankl was from Vienna. Adler is one of them, but not as popular. In this book, the assertion is that emotions are performed to solve problems. And one of the great examples is kind of like from the 70s when we all had landlines, when I was a kid. And mom might be on the phone and maybe she's gossiping with a friend. Oh, no, Cheryl, you should have heard what they said. And then, kid drops something. Oh, that's very bad. She will perform anger and then get back on the phone like, oh, no, it's all fine. If you can turn emotions on and off like that, then your emotions are voluntary. And the thesis in the book, which I think has a lot of truth to it, is that emotions are performed to solve interpersonal problems. So the waiter spills soup on you or something, and you perform anger to do what? To get a concession out of the restaurant or something like this. When you think of emotions as being performed to solve problems, then you realize that you have learned certain solutions, like as a child or elsewhere in your life, that these kinds of emotions are going to help you solve these kinds of problems. And it could be the emotions that your parents approved of. One of the problems that you want to solve is you don't get in trouble with your parents, or it could be the emotions that your parents responded to. But we become trained, and because we're conditioned by the responses we got as kids, we're no longer conscious of the emotions. So we don't have any wisdom about our emotions. What are the emotions that we want to have? How do we, then back to knowledge, how do we experience them? What's the likelihood that we're going to react in this way or the other way to some stimulus? That's the information. And just being able to observe our emotional state, that's the data. So in class, I teach engineering at Arizona State. And one of the things I'm supposed to teach is teamwork. Now, you've been on teams your whole life.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have no idea what teamwork even is, although we're surrounded by teams. For teams to work, I think the people on the team have to have some awareness of their thoughts, their feelings, their perceptions. So I'll ask my engineers, what do you think? And sometimes my engineering students say, well, I feel. I'm not interested in what you're feeling. The question is, what do you think? Or I might say, what do you feel? And they'll say, well, I think, as if they weren't able to distinguish between thoughts and feelings. And I think they really aren't able, like they're inexpert at distinguishing between thoughts and feelings. But there's something else going on too. If I ask you, what do you think? And you say, well, I feel. No one can argue with your feelings. Like you shut down any disagreement or debate. So it's a very defensive thing to say, well, I feel the answer should be 7. It's not a feeling, but you defend yourself by calling it a feeling. And if I say, what do you think? And you say, well, if I say, what do you feel? And you say, well, I think, you're also defending yourself. When you reveal your feelings and people are asking for your feelings and you give them to, you make yourself vulnerable to attack. And it could be you shouldn't feel that way, or you could be ridiculed for having a feeling. So people, it's not just that they have difficulty distinguishing between thoughts and feelings, but they will purposely confuse them in defensive ways. If they're asked for a thought, they will give you a feeling. And if they're asked for a feeling, they will give you a thought so that they cannot be criticized or judged for their response. It's a bad habit when it comes to teamwork. And so I often wind up teaching my engineers, look, if you're having trouble with your feelings, let's multiple choice it. Glad, mad, sad, afraid. You can pick as many as you like. And that's when they become more aware that they don't have any data on their own feelings.
Do you find that, let's put the mirror up in front of you in that aspect, because I think a lot of times when you're trying to say what you think in so many scenarios, it's really intimidating. So have you found yourself, like you could feel intimidating asking those questions?
Yep.
So what do you take from that? Do you think that the habit goes to you just naturally fall to that habit because I'm intimidated, so I'm going to at least build some sort of immediate defense?
Yeah, when people are intimidated, they will resort to defensive habits. They're not good habits. They're not productive habits, but it's understandable, especially if they're in a hierarchical relationship. I'm the professor, they're the student. There's already, sort of a reason to be intimidated and defensive. And one of the difficulties is that they're going to get a lot further when they get over that. So now they don't have a problem in finance, which I teach in my business practices class. They actually have a problem in emotional management. They're afraid. They don't want to admit that they're afraid, or they might not even be aware that they're afraid, but they're in particular be afraid of being criticized by me. Not everybody grew up with emotional safety in their family.
Sure.
And certainly not all businesses operate with emotional safety. That is where you won't be judged or shamed or humiliated for having an emotion or expressing an emotion. And I think it's a tricky thing because if emotions are performed to solve interpersonal problems, then I can understand why a lot of businesses would want to strip the emotions out. How dare you manipulate your coworkers with your emotions when what we're really trying to do is solve a problem here. But because there's such good information in the emotions, anger is a totally normal human response to a violation of boundaries. You might not even know where your boundaries are until you feel the anger and you notice the anger. You say, wait a second, what's going on here? This guy's trying to talk me into a deal that isn't good to me and for me. And he's putting a lot of pressure on me to buy something or to sign something that I really need time to revise and improve. And when the anger wells up, that's a data point that says there's something going on that you have not made conscious yet. So if a student or an employee or a coworker is feeling intimidated, it would be so much easier for them to say, I'm having trouble answering your question because I'm feeling intimidated.
Yeah.
Now, I might say, you shouldn't feel that way. And that makes me an ass.
Right. Right.
Because
Well, you're disregarding the emotion.
Yeah. Contradict. Don't tell people how to feel or what to think.
Well, that's what when you mentioned the teams, that's one of the ironies, I think, of teams. Like in large scale teams, this is a generalization, but I think a lot of times in teams we create curriculums that want you to conform to the team.
Yep.
And obviously there's good and bad teams.
Yep.
But what do you feel towards that?
At Morozko, everyone has two obligations to their teammates. We call them companions. Morozko's a company. What's a company? It's like a group of companions. So, I mean, yes, they are employees, but we call them companions. And you have two obligations to your companions. The first obligation is to make ideas better. That's what we're here for. We're not here to shoot ideas down. We're not here to advance our own hierarchy in the social pecking order. We have an obligation to one another to make the ideas better. And so everything that I'm going to respond to your idea with has to come from the expectation of making it better. So that makes it constructive rather than destructive, critique rather than criticism. The other obligation is to share their perspective. If you disagree, you owe it to your boss and your companions to share your perspective. It doesn't mean you're right. It means you must be able to say, I see it different, or I was thinking about it a different way, or what if we did it like this?
Yeah.
And that second one shows up like this. We have a rule at Morozko. You are never allowed to say, I told you so. There's no I told you so, because it's such a destructive thing.
Yeah.
When we're doing creative problem solving and I'm meeting my obligation to make things better and I'm meeting my obligation to share a perspective, and then whomever has decision rights in the organization is going to make their decision.
Right.
Now shut up. They know. They know you said so.
Yeah.
They know they made their decision. And the only thing that I told you so does is advance your sort of moral standing. And it takes on a moral accusatory tone. I told you so. You were wrong. I was right.
Yeah.
And then it destroys the relationship.
Well, it also disrupts the whole intention of being able to share ideas.
Correct.
Which is where I can imagine how that's not what the aim is.
Yep.
So
the corollary is there's no, I knew it. There's none of that, because if you knew it, you would have said it. And if you didn't say it, then you didn't know it.
So when you were talking earlier, this was lodged in my memory to not lose this, because it doesn't make as much sense right now of what you just said. But do you think that we have free will?
If we did not have free will, would we know the difference? Like, it's an interesting kind of philosophical question. And since you've asked it, I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say, I know we have free will, even though that's a misnomer, because I feel it. I feel like I can change my mind. But there's no empirical test.
Right.
There are two systems of belief. One of them is science. So science is an evidence-based system. Where you have evidence, go with science. Science is a way of structuring and organizing evidence to create belief. But don't get it confused with truth. Science terminates in belief. It's a belief system, not a truth system. Okay. The other one is faith. And faith is what you have when there is no evidence.
Right.
Don't ask evidentiary questions of faith. And don't ask faith-based questions of science, because now you're just mixing up the two systems. So some idiot atheist might say, well, you have no proof that there's God. That's a scientific question to a faith-based answer, and it's pointless. So do I believe we have free will? I don't have a scientific basis for free will because it's not a falsifiable hypothesis. But on my faith-based system, yeah, I think we do. And here's why. Because God made us with free will. There is no way that God could put us on this earth without free will as a test of our faith, as a test of our character, as a way for us to find faith or belief. If you think that God sent Jesus, his son, down to earth and did not give Jesus free will, then I think you're just crazy. Of course Jesus had free will. Of course Jesus had to doubt. Of course Jesus had to choose to believe, because God didn't make us and then force us into whatever it was. This is a faith-based belief. Of course I believe we have free will. I believe we were created that way.
I love how you package both of those, because that really helped me organize my ability to hear that. So I really like the package of that. Do you think that if it's hard for me to not bring it back to the hierarchy of what you were talking about with data, information, knowledge to wisdom? Because when we get to wisdom, the way I'm hearing that is when we get to that wisdom, that becomes what you just said of your own path of the free will or your own understanding.
It's really good, because wisdom is knowing what to do. Knowledge is knowing how to do it, and that's great. But sometimes there's nothing worse than doing a great job at the wrong thing. Because where does that get you?
Right.
So wisdom is knowing what to do. And I guess there's that joke, wisdom comes from making mistakes, and making mistake comes from lack of wisdom. It's kind of circular, and it feels that way sometimes.
Yeah, it does. Oh, yeah, we were just kind of talking about that at dinner. Yeah, that's life 101, I feel like. Well, the other thing I have towards that same hierarchy, to beat that up for a second, if we start at the bottom floor being data, how do we get data? And I like asking that to you, because I guess let's start, if I didn't throw the fastball at you when you were just getting into the box of pressing the start button, but I like doing that. I like,
did you quick pitch?
Yeah, quick pitch. I didn't even pick up the leg. But you have so many hats that you wear, and you wear them at such, from the way in which I see them, at such high levels, right? You have the entrepreneur hat, you have the professor hat, the author hat. Is it scientist fair?
Yeah.
I mean, that's very fair.
That's what the PhD does for me.
Right?
Yeah.
So then to connect you really landed the faith aspect to me, but then also the science aspect to me. And the way I've understood science is the pursuit of truth. So it's like we're trying to pursue truth. But then at the same time, how do we even collect the route of truth we're going to try to find? We get that from faith. And this is all just me thinking in the real time of that. So they actually need each other. But then I'm going to start at the bottom with this feels right, or maybe I think this is right. And that's how I can start to collect data. But you've acquired data and written papers and done certain things where you've actually had to start at the bottom in somewhat in a metaphysical way, create something from nothing and turn it into something. So then in your own perspective, how do you walk through life with both of those aspects? Like, you're going to go down and change the world and create science, and I'm going to put all my time into this data, and I'm going to acquire the information to get the knowledge to people. But then you also know you're probably never going to get to it, even though it's worth it to try to get to it. Does that make sense? And I'm asking that specifically to you and how you've gone down your journeys.
I'm fortunate I'm an engineer, which is a design discipline.
Okay.
So there's a difference between science and engineering. Now, engineering uses science, and I'm trained in science. Science describes the world the way it is. The scientist will count all the raindrops. The engineer will say, what should the world be? How do I want the world to be? How much water should there be?
Oh, yeah.
So the engineer starts with the science because the engineer has to know what's the point of departure, what's the world in which we're looking at. In Arizona, it would go like this. Oh, here's a beautiful river. You know, isn't this gorgeous? What we should really have is a dam and a stormwater retention pond and a bridge and a Walmart. You know, some
Yeah.
engineer comes along and says, that river that God made, you know, good job, God, but we're just going to make a few adjustments.
Yeah.
We're going to build the largest masonry dam in the world.
Take it from here.
Yeah, right? Thanks, God. we're on the job. It's the hubris of the engineer to conform the geography of the planet to their own imagination. And so when we do engineering, we should be humble about it. Everything that we build is a hypothesis. We don't know, but we're hoping that it will work out. We test it in our mathematical models, or we test it in our lab, or we test it at a smaller, less expensive scale so that we don't screw it up too bad when we build it. That's the right way to think about engineering. And I live in my imagination. I'm not the guy who generates a lot of the original data. I don't think there was any original data in my dissertation, for example.
Yeah.
But other people, they're more tuned to that. The question is, what should be measured? And now we have people, you know, measuring everything. You got your wearables, and you can get your sleep quality and your heart rate variability. And there's that old adage that if it can't be measured, then it can't be managed. But that's a crock of hooey. Not everything that is worth managing can be measured, and not everything that can be measured is worth managing. And I didn't make that up. That's probably, you know, Peter Drucker or somebody like that. Although I don't want to poo-poo, I don't want to devalue data. It isn't my strong point. Generating it is not my strong point. I find it laborious. And that's because hypotheses and creativity are where I really shine. I need other people then to create the experiments that I help structure. The purpose of a theory is to generate falsifiable hypotheses. And the purpose of the experiment is to falsify the hypothesis. And how do you do that? You do that with data. There's just a lot of people who are better at the data part than I am.
Like in the same lane, the same field?
Yeah. Engineering.
Like I was going to say who. The simple question of that is like, who? Give me an example of someone that, not, you don't have to use exact person.
Yeah.
Like, what's the...
Just about every faculty member in engineering is tuned to this. But I'll tell you why. I shouldn't say that it doesn't interest me. Engineering as a field is populated with people who are highly quantitative and highly material. So it's what I call the material fetish. There are 3 planes at which I think about the universe. And one is the material world. This is part of thermodynamics. You know, we have mass. And we know that mass, at least in a nuclear reaction, is equivalent to energy, and the other way around, energy equivalent to mass. So the energy is the second plane. These things can be measured. We can gather data about material and energy. There's a more abstract plane, and you could call it spiritual or imaginative. You could call it the force, you know, if you're into Star Wars. And because we don't have a meter for it, we don't have physics for it, it's often overlooked by my profession, which is full of physical scientists, because they believe if they can't measure it or observe it or sense it, that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's garbage. I know it exists. There's this legend that George Lucas created this concept of the force, that the mitochondria, that he was creating an analog for the mitochondria, that they were the source of the force and the sort of the antenna that attached all these beings. And I think that's a wonderful sort of metaphysical way of looking at the world. There is this third plane that I will call the spiritual, and it attaches people with a connection that cannot be measured with a probe or a sensor. And yet we know that it exists because we feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't like the word spiritual, then we can call it consciousness. Many people have this idea that consciousness resides somewhere inside the brain. And scientists have been looking for the seat of consciousness. Like, what's the physiological manifestation of consciousness in the body? And I think they're getting it wrong. I think the brain is more like your car radio. There's no little band inside your car radio. Your car radio has an antenna that picks up a radio wave.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist at the station, and it doesn't exist at the radio. It exists in all the spaces in between. And your car radio amplifies that signal that is ubiquitous everywhere, and it makes it visible to you. So the way I think about consciousness is your brain is an antenna. Consciousness is everywhere, and we tune into it with our brain. We amplify it. So sometimes we're on a frequency that will attach to people. What they feel, you feel. What they think, you think. And even sometimes what happens to them happens to you because you are on the same consciousness level of, I'm calling it frequency because of the analogy with the radio, but you are communicating on that level. And one of the things about grief, I think, is the loss of that conscious communication, or at least you think you've lost it. You might not have lost it, but you're in grief because you've lost confidence in it. Maybe you're still attached in some way. I know that there are people that I haven't seen in years and I have no contact with, and yet I still feel attached to, like I'm tuned to their radio station. And then there are people that I miss because I'm not sure they're listening to the same station anymore. I feel that there's supposed to be an attachment there, but I'm not getting the feedback that I need to be sure about it.
When you take your, I love where you're at right now, and just asking another personal question to this. When you evolve your channels, I think one of the hard part of the material, using your word of the material reality, is that you're still, when you evolve your channels and it maybe takes you off the channel of someone that you're close to or someone that knows you, that's one of the hard parts of being an artist, because you do have this, you have the scientist energy in the experiences, but I said this to you upstairs, I see you as this artist.
Yeah.
It's the person that I gravitate towards.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And the artist part of you correct me if I'm wrong, but as you evolve and it's like, okay, I want to try that out, you're getting channels from the field.
Yep.
And so then you have been in tune, I would imagine your whole life to poke and follow them.
Yep.
And then as you follow them, that inevitably changes your relationship with people.
Yep.
How have you handled that or dealt with that?
Some people in my life have been kind of, it sounds awful, but easy to let go. And some people in my life, I think, stay with me as if they were unsolved problems. One of the things about being an engineer is getting really good at solving problems. Most of my students are outstanding problem solvers. The difficulty is they don't know where the problems come from. They're not able to formulate a problem. And so they wind up in the service of solving other people's problems all the time. And I wish I could help with that.
Yeah.
But for me, my brain will not let go of problems. And so some people, when I feel like it's resolved, it might be a student whom I adore and they do a good job and they graduate. And I feel like, you know what? We're good here.
Yeah.
But where I have difficulty is the problems that are unresolved, and they stay in my brain. And sometimes they stay in my brain far too long. And I say that because my friends will tell me, let it go.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they stay in my brain, and 20 years later, I'm really glad they're there.
Yeah.
I've figured something out. And those are the best. I want to give you one example.
Please.
I did an article on the origins of autism. And this is because there's some people in my life who are on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And some of them I care very much about.
Sure.
And I've never really tackled this problem. But then Jay Bhattacharya, he's the director of the NIH, and he's a friend. And he goes on Twitter, They say, well, Secretary Kennedy has asked me to, find out what causes autism. And so we're going to start this program. I'm like, you know what? I have a personal interest and I have a friend. I'm going to go take a look at this thing. Chris Palmer put out a tweet. He's a psychiatrist at Harvard. And it was a 2024 review paper on the mitochondrial theory of autism. It's a great paper.
Yeah.
And the theory says because about 80% of children with autistic spectrum disorder, ASD, about 80% of those kids have blood markers that indicate some mitochondrial impairment. The theory says that it is the mitochondria in which autism originates. So I start reading and reading. Harvey, my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 6 years old. And this might not seem pertinent, but the year after he was diagnosed, this longitudinal study came out of Finland, and they said type 1 diabetes originates in a vitamin D deficiency during the first year of life when the immune system is developing. You can correct the deficiency later. So he's maybe 6 years old when he's diagnosed. He's got no vitamin D deficiency. So, well, if he's got no vitamin D deficiency, how could he possibly get type 1 diabetes?
Right.
It is the deficiency when the immune system develops. And even if the deficiency disappears, the risk of a child who is deficient in that critical first year of immune development, get Oliver checked out, get him some sunshine, get him that vitamin D, that risk persists for a lifetime. It is locked in. So I'm reading all this mitochondrial autism. Creatively, it's the same thing. The brain develops during the last trimester, during the first 3 years of life. When the mitochondria aren't working right, because they steer neurological development, if they're not working right, the brain will not develop correctly. It will develop along these atypical pathways. And even if the mitochondrial defect is corrected later on, the risk of autism showing up in the child later is locked in. Now, there's still a lot of neuroplasticity. The brain develops more slowly than the immune system does.
Okay.
And so there's still things you can do, but it is a mitochondrial impairment during that critical phase of brain development. Okay, great. But why do people think vaccines cause autism? I'm going to go back to my son with type 1 diabetes. He didn't have type 1 diabetes until he got a fever. And, kids get sick and they get the flu and they get better, but he didn't get better.
Yeah.
He just stayed in this sick state. It was the fever. It was the immunological event that triggered the onset of his type 1 diabetes. His immune system was primed for this autoimmune disorder where his own immune system will start attacking the cells in his pancreas to make insulin. That's what type 1 diabetes is. But it's not triggered until you have this immunological event.
Wow.
When you give a child who has atypical neurological development, but is hitting all their neurological milestones, and it looks like they're developing normal, when you give them a vaccine, often they will develop a fever. That's an immunological event. That triggers the onset of autism for which their brain has already been primed. Now, there's good news and bad news here. The bad news is that how can you go back in time and fix the mitochondria? The good news is that women can take care of their mitochondria both before conception, prenatally, so all during pregnancy. There are therapies that will target mitochondrial health. They will improve birth outcomes and they will reduce the risk of autism. So the good news is we can move that curve that is, exponentially increasing over the decades. We can move that down. We can flip it around if we take care of the pregnant women's mitochondria. The other good news is therapies that target mitochondria can reverse autism. There's often in a child who's 2 or 3 years old experiencing neurological regression, there's often enough neuroplasticity that if you get their gut microbiome right and you get their mitochondria right, they will recover those neurological milestones. There are children who have, they swear, been cured of autism. And what that means is they experience neurological regression. They have all the stereotypical behaviors that could be head banging, it could be stimming, it could be spinning, it could be any number of, it could be nonverbal, it could be refusal to make eye contact. And yet, after years of mitochondrial therapy, they no longer meet the diagnostic criteria of autism. So that's what I mean by when they say cure, but what I mean is like reverse the neurological regression. Now I'm telling you this whole story because this is an example of science moving forward by creative leap.
Yeah.
This is an example of an unsolved problem that stayed in my brain for 25 freaking years that bothered me to the point where I still feel shame and grief about it. And yet it came up at the right moment when I needed the right analogy to draw upon. There is no 30-year finished longitudinal study of, mitochondrial impairment. And we're not going to sit around and wait 30 years to figure this one out. We're going to say, look at what we learned about type 1 diabetes. How does this apply to autism? Let's run the interventions right now, the therapies that target mitochondria, and let's see if we can move those curves immediately and recover the neurological capacity in those children that have already been effective. Now I can design the experiment and I can hand it off to the clinicians and the practitioners and the people who have the real expertise to gather the data. And we can fill out the entire hierarchy. Data, knowledge, right? Data, information, knowledge, wisdom. Yep. That's welcome to the way my brain works.
Oh, I love the way your brain works.
Thanks.
I love the way your brain works. Well, because it's I never know how to say this. Maybe you can say it really well because you're on a roll with that. But it's like it's your experience, right? It's like you're committed. You're committed to the process.
Yeah.
And so then, if it takes 30 years to come back to the gold, if it takes 10 years, and there's multiple golds, right? But it's like it all comes. You have to be immersed into the field for the potential to even have your antenna catch something.
You got it.
And that's where I think it's making a lot of sense to, as I'm learning about you tonight and like picking up all the pieces of all the things that you peel together. I want to ask this question about thermodynamics, but I also want to ask one more question, personal side of it, because of all the avenues that you pull from. Like I always think, I'll make a quick comical side of it is like the coffee, right? Like people think I'm starting coffee because they think I just want to make like a cute barista coffee shop. And there's a part of that like I'm keen to. But at the same time, there's something about coffee right now that's speaking to me that I've been studying for a few years, and it's immersed into the grand scheme project that I'm always after. And I don't have to know the answer. I just know that that's pulling me, and I'm fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always followed that feeling. And that's what you're doing. But you're also doing that at large scale. Like you are doing some work that publicly can get criticized.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will pull opinion to data or defend or fight or whatever. But you're creating that at like a very public scale.
Yeah.
It's large scale. So, I mean, just asking you that as a friend too. It's like, you got to go and I can see it and feel it on you, right? Like you have to go down that path.
Yeah.
Regardless.
I don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice. You never had a choice.
Yeah.
But then on the whole path of that, how do you pursue through it? Because I can only imagine how much you've had to continuously go through battles and just, I'm sure there's been a lot of ways along the way where you could have easily been stopped.
I have a life sentence with no parole. I don't know what my crime was. I wasn't there for my jury or my conviction. And yet I must do this because it was chosen for me. Yeah. I don't get to not do it. I don't get to not teach. At some point, I realized I was born to teach and I didn't have a choice. If I lost my job at ASU because I put something on Twitter that offended somebody or whatever, I might be in a van down by the river, but I'll have a freaking whiteboard, because I have to do this. Mm-hmm. I have to learn. I have to study these problems. And there's some part of me that has to make a contribution to society. And this is probably just some traumatic experience out of my childhood that I'm never going to resolve. So one of the things that we got now is in the aftermath of COVID. We have, I should say, in the aftermath of the lockdowns and the response to COVID, we have a massive mental health crisis
Yeah.
in this country. And we have a deficit that is eating the country alive. These are the same problem, but people haven't put them together. You got Elon Musk out there with Doge and saying we got to cut spending, and he's not wrong. But you have Kennedy out there saying we got to cut back on healthcare. He wants to cut the NIH budget by 40%. This is a massive impact to the universities that rely on sponsored research, right? And Kennedy's point is, well, what have they done for us lately? You know, if life expectancy has fallen off a cliff in the United States, which it has, then why are we spending all this money on research at the National Institute of Health? We've got 50 years of the National Cancer Institute, and we've poured hundreds of billions of dollars into cancer research. You know what we've done? Extended the expected lifespan of a cancer patient by almost 9 months or some, I mean, on average. This is ridiculous. And it's a miserable 9 months of chemotherapy. We have no return on our investment. So when I say they're the same problem, we spend, I forget exactly what it is, but more than $1 trillion a year on healthcare. And here's a government deficit of about the same. If we were to stop killing ourselves with all the money that we're spending in the name of health, but actually is in disease, we could fix both the deficit, the economy, the debt problem, and the health of the country all at once. Well, how are we going to do that? The best things in health are free. Sunshine. Now, Morozko is not free, but you're up in Minnesota. Get some cold exposure. And you could say, well, organic isn't free and grain-fed isn't free. You should try chemotherapy. You should try leukemia if you think grain-fed beef is too expensive. You should try dementia and see what that costs you. So when I say free, I might be exaggerating to some extent. But a lot of it is, whether it's winter or sunshine or sleep, you can do these things without having to pay a royalty to a pharmaceutical shareholder. So maybe it's just in me an outsized sense of injustice. But I got to keep podcasting about it. I got to keep inventing about it. I got to keep working on these things because these are the unsolved problems that will nag me if I don't keep working on them.
Yeah, that is incredible. The little pause there, we came back with a little tea break.
Yeah.
But now that we come out of the tea break, let's dive into thermodynamics.
All right.
That's what you were talking about earlier.
I did my dissertation on thermodynamics.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I know... No, I'm just going to pause because I could ask more. I want to stay on that lane. Thermodynamics, so the way I want to ask you is, what does it mean to you? Because I know there's some depth in there too.
There's a book that I read in grad school. I think it was published in the 40s by a German physicist, Erwin Schrödinger.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? It's called What is Life?
Okay.
And life is a constant struggle against entropy. And now you're going to be like, what is entropy? At the time that I was doing my dissertation, I was on a thermodynamic measure of the environment. I grew up in environmental engineering. You know, I wanted to save the world from pollution and to get an understanding of which pollutants were the greatest priority. I developed this entropy measure. The problem I had is that there are 27 different definitions of entropy in the scientific literature. Like, entropy is such an abstract concept. You cannot measure entropy directly. You can measure pressure, you can measure mass, you can measure temperature, but you cannot measure entropy directly. There's no such thing as an entropy meter. So it is so abstract that it has already left the material and the energetic plane. It's getting closer to working on that consciousness plane or that spiritual plane. It's not all the way there. You can only measure entropy between two states. So you can measure it during a rate of change. The first definition of entropy was heat flux, so the heat moving in and out of a system divided by temperature. That was Clausius' definition. And they've gotten more and more abstract since. Life is thermodynamics. the difference between a body that is alive and a body the moment that it dies is no material marker.
Wow.
There is no like molecular restructuring that is going on at this sort of moment of death. What happens is the flow of energy through the body has ceased. So the difference between life and death is this flow of what Schrödinger called negative entropy. Later on, a new word was coined for it called exergy. Exergy is the ability to do work. Life is thermodynamics. Life is this flow of energy, more correctly, exergy, of this capacity to do work that goes through your material, your corpus. Okay. What is health? Now, this is the huge leap, because there's very few people who talk about thermodynamics and health. Even though life is thermodynamics, physicians don't understand it that way. All the people who are looking for, longevity markers, they're measuring their telomere length or their DNA methylation or whatever it is, the Brian Johnsons of the world, they're looking at material markers. If you could measure the telomere length on a corpse, and it wouldn't tell you anything about its longevity. These material markers are useless for longevity. Energetic markers, if you can get them, much better. So what is health? Health is abstract. They used to say in medicine, health is the absence of disease, which is a crappy way to think about it. People still think of health as a state. In thermodynamics, a state would be a pressure, a concentration, something that you could measure. But health is better understood as entropy, that is, the difference between two states. Health is not whether you have a broken arm. Health is how fast does your broken arm heal. It is the trajectory, it is the velocity between two different health states. So health is not how much can you lift. Health is how fast do you come back from a workout.
Can I call that adaptation or adaptability?
That's a really good point, but I want to save that word for resilience, because to me they mean two different things. Health is your capacity to heal, is your capacity to recover. How quickly do you come back? And you know that when people get old and frail and sick, you know that it takes them longer to recover. So intuitively, there's something attractive about this idea that health is not a state, it is the difference between two states and your ability to transit from one to the other. Now, resilience for me is different. Resilience does rely on adaptive capacity, but because resilience might be adaptation to a completely new state. There's lots of different forms of resilience. It could be innovation, there could be efficiency, there could be security, there could be reliability. And I don't think of health as encompassing all of those. I've done a lot of work on resilience, particularly in infrastructure. And now I say, like, I'm a scholar of resilience, but I don't study concrete and steel and glass so much anymore. I'm more interested in human resilience.
I was going to say, you're studying the organism.
Correct. I think health enables resilience. So I would put resilience, again, on a higher stage of the hierarchy. I think health is one of the tools or one of the resources on which we can draw to be resilient. But I don't think of health as synonymous with resilience.
So then you're in this is unfair to the flavor of all of our conversations of this evening, but if I just bucket you in the cold for this specific topic.
Yeah.
So I think you go a lot more around a lot of areas, but cold is your baby.
It's what I'm known for.
Yeah,
right
I was
now.
gonna say
Yeah.
that's
all about the ice bag.
That's your pocket.
Yeah.
So if you use that medium and you talk about the spectrum of all health, there's such a variety of people, right? You have kids, you have women, you have males, you have athletes, you have general pop, you have old age. Take it however you want to go. But if we talk about humans, the spectrum of humanity with cold and our ability to create resilience, which allows us to be healthy as a way of being, what's your relationship with what I'm saying right now?
There was a time in human history about 70,000 years ago and I forget what volcano it was that erupted, but massive volcanic eruption blanketed the atmosphere with ash, and it created an ice age. Now, anthropologists believe that during that ice age, the race of Homo sapiens was limited to a few thousand that lived along the coast of Africa. Because there was so much ice, the water level of the ocean dropped, and our ancient ancestors were living in these coastal areas, probably where the rivers met the sea.
Okay.
And those areas have been now inundated with water because the sea level has since risen. We don't have any fossil records. There are a few in South Africa, but we have limited data on what life was like. Here's what we know. Human beings have physiological adaptations that suggest they were aquatic, that we lived at the water's edge, and that we depended upon the water and the plants and animals in it for our existence, and that this goes way back, like before any ice age.
Yeah.
And this is because the fatty acids that are available in the fish and in the plants are essential for human brain development. There's other reasons to believe that Homo sapiens emerged at the water's edge and that we're adapted to the water. We can see it in our anatomy. I'll give you an example. We share something like 99% of our DNA with bonobos and chimps. I'm not saying we're apes, although other people would say that.
Yeah.
I think humans are distinct.
Okay.
And yet, when you
I
look
like
at
that
the,
you say that.
all right, you look at the chromosomes, and we're like, well, we got a lot in common in our
Right.
anatomy. But we have subcutaneous fat. Chimps and bonobos don't have that. They're ripped, you know. You know who has subcutaneous fat? Dolphins, whales, manatee, the aquatic mammals have that. We have nostrils that point down, whereas the chimps and bonobos have nostrils that point out. If you're going to dive in the water, you need nostrils that point down, or the water will go straight up into your brain. We have more skin between our fingers than, you know, the chimps and bonobos do. And so all of these anatomical features suggests that we are aquatic, or at least semi-aquatic mammals. But here's the kicker. Human babies are born knowing how to swim. You know, you see like the Discovery Channel, a baby giraffe pops out of its mother, and it's like walking right away. That's not the way it works for humans. Human babies are born knowing how to swim. And you know why? Because they were born in the water. During that ice age, that damn water was cold. The water that we foraged in, the water that we fished in, that we depended upon to stay alive because there were no growing season, you know? Our ancient grandmothers had to survive the cold water, both to live, to eat, and to give birth in. We are all, to one extent or another, cold adapted because we carry the mitochondria that was selected for in that what's called a population bottleneck during the ice age. Mitochondria have their own DNA, and they don't reproduce sexually. You inherit your mitochondria exclusively from your mother, and she got it exclusively from her grandmother. So there's no sexual evolutionary component. They only adapt through mutation. And there is a rate of adaptation, but essentially our mitochondria, I'm going to exaggerate, but hopefully my point will survive the exaggeration. We have the same mitochondria that our grandmothers 70,000 years ago who survived that cold water had. We need cold water. And it is absent from our highly industrialized, like comfortable lives. And there's an argument to be made that populations that get a lot of sunshine don't need as much cold. That there seems to be some compensatory factors, as far as I can tell, between the two. But I know where my people came from. That was the North Sea. Like Seager, it means harpoon, like loosely translated. My people, I'm told by my grandmother, they escaped England because they didn't want to be persecuted for their religion, you know?
Yeah.
I know I need cold. I can feel it in my body when I get it and when I don't. But as the general human population level, what cold does is maintain in your body brown fat. If you do not get cold, then your body will lose all of its brown fat. Up until about maybe 9 or 10 years ago, Medical doctors thought there was no such thing as brown fat in an adult human being. Infants have a ton of it, but then they thought, oh, everybody loses it. And that's not true. A team in Sweden discovered it on what's called a PET scan, and then cancer centers all over the world started looking for brown fat, found out 5% of the cancer patients that they'd scanned had active brown fat, and that meant 95% of adult human beings in all these Western countries had zero detectable brown fat. This is a metabolic and a mental tragedy, because brown fat is not just what keeps you warm in the cold, it is also an essential secretory organ. It works with the thyroid to regulate your metabolism, and it produces what are called neuroprotective factors that protect and heal the brain. So if you don't have brown fat, it's no wonder your thyroid gets dysregulated, because it's the brown fat that modulates thyroid function, and you become much more vulnerable to diseases of the brain like dementia. So now, what's my relationship with the cold? I have a personal relationship, and so the whole company, Morozko, has come out of what the cold has done for me personally. But if I look at the portfolio of interventions available, plenty of people are doing hyperbaric. That you can't like shake a stick at the internet without a red light company dropping out, right? There are so many, there are more supplement companies than there are supplement customers, as far as I can tell.
Well said.
When we started Morozko, there was no such thing as an ice bath that made ice. And so there was this huge gaping hole in what people needed from nature. Your body expects to be cold, and you will become diseased if you don't get cold. That's true for me, it's true for you, and it's true for almost everybody. So the world needed a cold bath. It needed one that made ice. The best way to get cold is, go hop in the lake, go hop in the Pacific Ocean, go out in the winter in a t-shirt and shorts or something like that. The best way to get cold is nature. And the second best way to get cold is Morozko. Because I live in Phoenix. Like, I don't have the ocean.
Absolutely.
So that's why I had to invent it.
That's brilliant.
There are other things that got to get done. I own a green light company. And I own a green light company because someone I cared about very much at the time experienced migraine headaches. Green light will take away the pain of migraines. Migraines are $1 billion a day problem in the United States, and people are throwing pharmaceuticals at them, and it's terrible because these pharmaceuticals at best are imperfect, partial relief. But you put the green light up against your eyes, you let that go for 10 or 20 minutes, and you will get a demonstrable improvement. Some people get complete resolution of their pain, and some people go down from like an 8 or a 9 on a 10-point scale to a 2, and they no longer need meds anymore. It feels miraculous. So the question is, why does green light work? Well, because our ancient ancestors, they sought solace in the forest. Where do you think, like, if there was danger, if there was anxiety, where would our ancient ancestors, in the Garden of Eden, where would they? They go right up the tree. Like, they belong, we as creatures belong in the shady forest. Now you're here in Minnesota, you've got a lovely place, and I come in up your driveway and it's trees all around. How does it feel? You can't stay anxious, when you're in that kind of nature. And there's some really good studies on forest bathing. There are 2 wavelengths of light that dominate the shady forest: green and infrared. And so it's no surprise that if we don't have enough green light exposure and enough infrared, that we become anxious and depressed. Now you take a patient out in the shady forest bathing resolves depression, cures cancer, speeds wound healing. Like, there's this whole list of incredible benefits that you'd think, well, that can't possibly be true. But the Japanese are at the leading edge of this. And guess what? Spending a few hours a week out in the forest turns out to be really good for your health. If you live in Phoenix and you don't have a forest, then you got to get a green light.
I was going to ask you where the green light came. Like, where did you see that from? Because the cold makes tremendous sense to me in the story and the historical side of that, and then in the science side, in the nature side of that. But I was curious, like, how did you go down the green light?
I was looking for papers on UV. UV gets a really bad rep because tanning beds are dangerous and UV will cause cancer. But also, every study on UV light in isolation is bullshit because there's no such thing as UV light in isolation. The UV that we get from the sun is always coming with infrared wavelengths. You never get UVB without UVA. You never get UVA without infrared. And so to study UVB or UVA in isolation is ridiculous because that's not the exposure that we have. Infrared protects against sunburn and it protects against cancer. So the safest tanning bed in the world, which is what I wanted to invent at the time, would have infrared, near infrared, and UV in it all at once. And these lamps now exist, but they're unusual or rare. Google must have figured out that I was interested in phototherapy because as best as I remember, they sent me some paper on green light and migraines that was coming out of Harvard University that showed that people who experience what's called photosensitivity, they're having a migraine and any kind of light feels like it makes it worse, got pain relief out of green wavelengths. Every other wavelength hurt. But Harvard studied them all and they said, hey, 525 nanometers, or maybe it was 530, actually relieved pain. There were a couple of devices based upon the Harvard study, and University of Arizona did a bunch of studies that corroborated the Harvard results. I bought one of them and I tested it with two people who get headaches, and they both said that they felt probably some relief. But these devices were so underpowered that you had to lock yourself in your bathroom or something, go complete darkness, and be in there for 45 minutes staring at the damn lamp for the green light to work. So I called a friend who has a red light company. I said, would you make me one of your red lights but put green in it instead? And he did. It came over from China because that's where his stuff is manufactured. And he said, it's terrible. It's too bright. It'll never work. I drove out there. I thought he was right. But this woman I was dating at the time who got migraine headaches, she said, let me see that.
Yeah, let me try it.
Took it out of my hand. She shut her eyes. She put it right up against her face. And she said, this feels really good. It
So
took
that
her.
was there.
That was it. I knew we had it. What was missing was a green light that was powerful enough to work when your eyes are closed.
Yeah, to pierce through the skin, huh?
Yeah. Now you don't have to be in a closet because once you close your eyes, you're broccoli out all the other wavelengths.
Yeah.
And then you put the bright green and it attenuates maybe 70% of the light, but the 30% that gets through is still enough to take away the headache pain. And I talk about it a little bit on podcasts. I wish I had more time to help people discover this, because for the people for whom it works, it feels like a miracle.
Right.
And it's the same thing. It is using technology to reconnect people with nature, because we're not going to go back to living in caves. I live on the 32nd floor, and I like my downtown apartment in the hottest city in North America. So I'm going to use technology to solve problems that technology created. There would not be 5 million people living in the Phoenix metropolitan area, without air conditioning and triple glazed windows or whatever that, and heated leather seats up here are going to keep you comfortable all winter long, but they also make you sick.
It's funny you say that, because I was gonna ask you that, because this is and I'll wear this as my opinion, but I think something my ego has had a hard time with in the last decade or so is, I'm just gonna frame it like that. Like when I got into cold, it was through nature.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have the options of the cold tubs. I wasn't really on my radar at the time. It was just, I had a buddy who was jumping into this creek up here in Minnehaha, and he invited me, and I went, and it was crazy cold.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. It was, terrified type deal. And then I told you the Lake Minnetonka, I trained for 16 weeks.
Yeah.
I would do breath work in the cold shower every morning, and I was getting myself prepped to swim in the lake. And then I did that with no heat source. And then eventually we started getting the Rubbermaids, and you remember when that was big, you get the Rubbermaid horse trough.
I had one of those galvanized.
Yeah. But so I think something that I had an issue with personally when it started to change over and it became commercialized, I felt, and that was my own issue, but I felt like that was the wrong way that we were going as a society, because it was what you just said. It's like our disconnect from nature is why cold makes sense, because of our thermoregulation. Like we don't get regulated. We sit in these air conditioning homes, the heat, all that stuff. And so for me, it was almost like a battle that you couldn't win in America for a while there. And I think that fight has moved past me, where it's like, well, we got to go back to nature. We got to go back to nature. And I spent a lot of my early mid 20s. That was like the fight I felt was the fight to pursue. And I don't regret that, because I needed that fight. But you're right. It's like, then you get to a spot where it's going, well, we're not going to reverse New York City. We're not going to redo the fact that that beautiful bay of San Francisco is now a concrete jungle.
Yep.
So what do we do? And then that's when I started kind of having to put myself away and look at it as, well, you got to work into it. You got to coexist with it, and you got to create nature with this infrastructure that we built. And hearing you speak, it's really cool for someone like myself to hear you say all these things with all the things that you're also packaging. But then I also want to put you into my mindset of how have you handled that process in the country or in the world, with the fact that you're also still battling cheap products. Yep. You're battling people who just, not such people, but like industries that just package 5 benefits on a thing and pop it out there. And it kind of reverses the natural human instinct to be a human.
Okay, so there's 2 things happening here for me that are connected. And I'm going to take the long way around to your answer. The first one is biohacking. Hacking became a term when the world got online and they're breaking into computers and stuff, okay? Biohacking has become a term for looking for shortcuts to change your physiology or your biology. In particular, if you want to go supranormal, like they might say optimized, but you want to exceed what the normal range would be. So you got people speed running NAD drips and stuff like that. Yeah. Like my grandmother never cooked up an NAD drip in her kitchen, you know? So there is in the US this thirst for the shortcut, or for speed, or for efficiency. I think it comes with our industrialized mindset, and I hate the term biohacking and I don't want to use it anymore. Dean Hall is a friend of mine, and he said he would rather biohaving. Have you got sunshine? Have you got cold water? Have you got the forest? Like, have you got the things that you need that your body's expecting to survive? Because I would much rather biohave than biohack. Okay, I think that's great for, this kind of next best thing to nature approach. How does it apply to commerce? This is what I mean by the long way around. This sort of shortcut, fast result, hacker mentality, it applies to commerce in a way like you wouldn't believe. I'm going to throw up a website, and all I need to do is hack the sales funnel, digital marketing, ad algorithm, whatever it is. This idea of a digital business is about trying to hack some social media algo to go viral and trick people into buying your cheap ass product that they could have got off of Alibaba for 1/10 of the cost. It's all made in China, and it's made with the same mentality in a factory of indentured servants, if not outright slaves, who are taking shortcuts to get the minimum viable thing that could be displayed on a website that will trick somebody into buying it. So the same antipathy that I have for biohacking, I have for this sort of digital marketing hack. And cold plunges are rife with charlatans and digital marketers and outright criminals. And what do I mean by that? People who don't stand by their warranty, people who have usurious restocking fees, people who will make claims about their product that simply aren't true. And what they're doing is looking for a fast buck, because we're addicted to fast food and we're addicted to fast anything. Morozko never took a fast growth approach. That was Plunge. Plunge started shortly after Morozko. And I remember when They came over to our backyard to take a look at how we were doing it. And they decided to go a different direction. What we were doing was buying refrigeration components, figuring out how they work, turning that galvanized horse trough into a freezer that would make its own ice. And these guys said, screw that. You know what we could do is drill a couple of holes in a bathtub and attach it to an aquarium chiller, and it's just all off the shelf stuff. And we'll package these components together and ship them to the customer with instructions on how they can put it together. Then Joe Rogan went on Instagram and he said, hey, cold plunge. And of course, he's in Morozko, but not everybody wanted to wait 10, 12 weeks and spend $10,000 to get a Morozko. You can now get like a $250 cold plunge at Costco.
Oh, yeah.
And it appeals to this sort of hacker, I want it now, fast food mentality that exists in the United States. And I can't really blame people who are saying, hey, I don't know if I want to go every day. I don't know if I'm like a total, ice bath regular practitioner. I want a cheap thing that I can get started with and see how it works. I just can't put my customers in one of these like inflatable bisphenol A, phthalate, riven, brominated, flame retardant, plastic, flexible things and say that it's healthy. The difficulty in our industry is everybody's trying to work it out as they go. That's a problem, of course. But nobody has been, this is going to offend some people, but nobody's been charged enough money. People have been addicted to the dopamine hit of the Memorial Day sale or the President's Day sale or whatever. And I know this as a business person. If I advertise $1,500 off or something, I will get a bunch of sales. I will feel good about that in the moment. And it's a race to the frickin' bottom. So you've seen Edge Theory go out of business. They grew a lot faster than Morozko. And you've seen Odin go out of business. And now we see Plunge is trying to sell equity on their WeFunder site. Why would a company be saying, if you buy $1,000 worth of equity, you get $1,500 of product coupons or something? Because they're cash tight too. And so is Morozko. We are hardly the picture of, fiscal health. This is an extremely competitive market where now there's got to be 100 cold plunge companies. And most of them are reselling the exact same crap that they all get from the same factories in China that are churning it out as fast as they can. The difficulty there is if you want to make a design change, if you want to correct a flaw, if you want to do anything, you got to wait 6 months. First, you got to figure out how to tell the Chinese to do it, and they got to put it on a slow boat. Then it's got to get over to the port of Long Beach or something like that. Then it's got to get to you. We have an advantage at Morozko that we can service everything that we build because we built it.
Yeah.
And when our customers are telling us how to make it better, we can put that into it because everything's made in-house. We can put that into our product right away. That's the practical side of Made in America. There's also, I don't know, maybe it's an ego side or an ideological side, but I could not bring myself when we had the opportunity to outsource our manufacturing to China. I couldn't conscience the idea that it's made by people I don't know under conditions that I'm not aware of in a country that I don't agree with. So instead, I hired people who didn't know how to make ice baths, trained them on how to do it, and training was one of our most enormous expenses for a long time. And I'm doing it right there in Phoenix, 7.5 miles from my house.
Do you feel like your mission, do you think that, because there's got to be a lot of fear in making that decision, especially in the moment.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you just go back to the faith aspect?
Yeah, that's exactly what gets you through the fear. I read some books about entrepreneurs, and how they got through it. Elon Musk, he says, entrepreneurship is like chewing glass and staring into the abyss, right? Well, there's one, Ben Horowitz. He wrote The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It seems like a ridiculous title, but he was talking about the company that he and Andreessen had. And he would say how it looked bleak and it was over. And he had arguments with his wife that he was very candid about in his book. And then he would just keep trying. Persistence is the single most important predictor of success in any founder. Well, I've had my moments where, you know, it might be 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm like, it's over. We just can't, I don't know what we're going to do, you know? Then the sun will come up. It's the worst before the sun comes up. And then I'll get in the ice bath and I'll come out and I'll say, well, there's 3 things we haven't tried yet. Before I quit, I'm just going to try these 3 things. I guess maybe one of them will work. And that seems like it'll buy me, you know, 2 good weeks or a good month or something like that. We'll hang on. And then something else in the market will change and we'll be right back, you know, in difficult circumstances again. And I'll be like, well, that's it. I can't see how we're going to continue. But I might get an email of encouragement. Somebody said, you know, Professor Seager, I used to have allergies. I don't have them anymore. Ever since I started ice bath. Or somebody might email and say, I used to have Hashimoto's and I don't have that anymore. Or I used to have low testosterone. I don't have it anymore. Or some people say, I have cancer and your ice bath is shrinking my tumor. And I have the images. Here they are. How can I give up?
Yeah.
I can't stop. Right. So I say, wait a second. Here's 2 things I haven't thought of. You know, here's a couple things we haven't tried yet. Let's see if those work.
Yeah.
You know, and then something works and we'll get another week or we'll get another 2 weeks and maybe that'll get us to a good month. And so far we haven't quit. There's an upside and a downside to persistence. The upside is it's the single most important determinant of eventual success. And the downside is the people who love you will tell you to quit because they see you struggling. They see how hard it is. They don't want you to humiliate themselves. They don't want to feel the pain of watching you struggle. And they'll say, you know, you should stop. You know, you gave it a shot. You have nothing to be ashamed of, right?
Yeah.
They'll say, come down off that wall, you know, and they'll tell you that they love you. But, you know, should you listen to them? Nobody can tell you when to pivot or when to quit or when to stop. You have only your conscience to answer to in a moment like that. And there's no shame in stopping. I just haven't been able to do it yet. And I don't want to. I mean, I hope that we're going to be a, you know, $1 billion company solving a $1 trillion problem because that's how big this problem is.
Amen.
And I keep working. I keep trying to train and I keep trying to teach and I keep trying to work towards that trajectory.
Well, that's what I was asking about earlier. And I really appreciate sharing that. First of all, that was incredible. That's what I was asking you earlier in the sense of, I don't know, what is that consciousness? Is that God? Is that the hero's journey? Is that the alchemy, the alchemist? Or maybe it's looking at it as you know, when you're on that degree of a pursuit. It's odd how sometimes even those people closest to you, because they don't want to see that pain and suffering. In a way, it's a deep paradox because it's also like that's the degree in which you will be tested.
Yep.
That it'll go to the closest people to you.
Yep.
And I've never been able to understand that. But I think as I've gotten older, I've just been able to understand that I can't understand that. Maybe that's a wisdom to that point. But then putting that into the hierarchy of a knowledge, that is real. And that's what I was asking you earlier about that, because of you won't be able to. You're not going to be able to. No.
Yeah.
And that's why it's even at the volume of the closest people to you would want you to stop. It's you, that degree of mission, man, it's just, you can't put, that's why I wrote that book without words, which I don't love the way I wrote that book necessarily. I think I could have been better at that, but the title I love, because the title was Without Words, Mastering the Art of Being, meaning you're this being, but it'll always be without words when you try to piece it together and really try to tell people what this is. Like, could you really even explain what it is that you feel inside?
I wish I could.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
There's an analogy. I used to have a dog and I got her at the pound. I don't really know what breed, but she was a fool for the tennis ball. So
Yeah.
she would, go retrieve that ball, whatever. And I realized that whatever it's 10,000 years of breeding or something like that, culminated in this puppy, and she had to go get that ball. You couldn't train it out of her. If you put a harness on a husky, it's going to pull. That's what it's meant to do.
Mm.
If you have a golden retriever and you throw a ball in the water, it's going to go get it. It's like what it's meant to do. I'm meant to teach. I'm meant to create knowledge. I'm meant to do certain things in this world. And I'm no longer questioning that. I'm just going to keep doing it. So sometimes I get to this point where, maybe Morozko will go bankrupt like Odin did. Maybe Morozko will bankrupt, go right. And then I say, that doesn't mean it's over.
Right.
I mean, that just means the debtors don't get paid.
Right.
That's all that is.
Yeah.
We can figure that one out, and then we'll keep going. This idea of a mission, what are we doing? We are providing the knowledge and equipment necessary for human resilience, necessary for recovery from trauma, necessary for health and well-being. I'm not going to stop doing that.
Ever. You
Right.
can't.
You got it. Yep.
That's why the company matters, but it's bigger than that.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I was saying that accurately.
And maybe some people, maybe that's not for them. That's okay. Not everybody's going to like hop on the good ship Seager for this, journey off to the horizon where maybe there's a new world and maybe there isn't. But if you're on that ship, then, I have rules, I have expectations, and I'm the captain, and this is the way we do it. Because we don't have a lot of room for, mistakes or dissent or disloyalty or lies or selfishness or anything like that. It's just too difficult a journey.
Well, that's why I was asking you upstairs when I was talking about on the Rogan podcast, when you guys get mentioned, because you guys get mentioned at large scale.
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking you from like a fellow entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because that comes with its own responsibility too.
People ask me like, how'd you get on Rogan, or how'd you get on Greenfield, or how'd you get Cam Hanes or whatever?
Yeah.
I didn't get any of these people. Like, they took it upon themselves to share with their audience something that they thought was really cool. I think Steve Martin, people asked him, how do you break into stand-up? And he said, you have to be so good that you cannot be ignored. Now, I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't thinking that we were going to, get on Ben Greenfield or Rogan or anything like that.
Right.
We just wanted to do something.
Yeah, you were pursuing that.
Yeah, we wanted an ice bath. Like we're going to the gas station and buying, 100 pounds of ice, and then it would all melt 5 minutes later. And we're like, well, this is a pain in the ass. We wanted something for us.
Right.
And it turned out kind of in a Rick Rubin way, because he's an ice bath guy too.
Nice.
When you make something to please yourself, sometimes other people get really interested in it and they want it too. So it's kind of the Steve Martin thing. Be so unusual, be so exceptional, be so daring that you cannot be ignored. This is the thing about the tightrope walker. Nobody wants to see you walk a rope that's like laying on the floor. But if you stretch it like between the World Trade Centers, before they got blown up, and the guy is 230, I don't know how, 100 stories up in the air, and he could die if he falls up. That's riveting.
Yeah.
So if you want an audience, you got to do the things that captivate that audience. They're so unusual and so dangerous and so vulnerable that people cannot take their eyes off of you. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to humiliate yourself, or at least risk that humiliation? Because that's what it takes. And most of the people, whether they're junior faculty or students, if I ask them, what is so important to you that you're willing to risk public humiliation for it?
It's a beautiful question.
Right? It's a wonderful question.
Yeah, it is.
Because it strips everything bare. And you might say, some people are going to say, oh, well, they're kids, right? Like their children have to be that important. No, it's not. In fact, it's just the opposite. Many parents are more worried that their kids are going to embarrass them, do something to embarrass. They don't think, oh, my kids are so important to me, I would risk public humiliation for their well-being. They say, no, I will sacrifice my child's well-being as long as it doesn't embarrass me, you know?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
is it's the essential question. And if the person is like, well, I'm not really into that public humiliation thing, that's not it, then you know what you're dealing with, and it's okay. They're just not ready for your mission.
Do you think that that's relative, though?
How so?
For instance, I guess I'll say this, and I'll say this on my podcast in a public sense for public humiliation. But one of the things that I've always felt like I've thought different in a way that, for me, I've had to figure out how I think.
Yeah.
Which is what you're saying. So I've had to spend a significant amount of time trying to understand what this thing is.
Yeah.
And as I've acquired wisdom, we'll say, from all the data and the information and going up, I love that hierarchy, by the way.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's really helped people. And I've created a career and a profession where I get paid for thinking.
Yeah.
I get paid for ideas.
That's my job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And I think that's where we connect in that.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. I think about the fact that I've continued to just move up the ladder without really trying. I've just been trying to understand my own thoughts, and I've been seeking my own mission and those sort of things. And then things have always kind of been all the things that you've been explaining. But what I've been thinking about recently is a lot of people now that I work with speak and work at large scale, like large audiences hear them. And there's times, this happened recently, I was at an event and I was listening to a guy who was speaking to a lot of people, and he's very well known. And I'm sitting there watching him, studying. I know we're going to go be together after this, just the two of us, and we're going to talk about this event.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of critiquing, because that's that's the reason why I'm there. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm studying every word. I'm looking at all the structure. I'm looking at the audience. I'm studying all these things. And there was a moment in the situation where I'll say my ego, I was like, why am I not speaking?
Okay.
Right? Because I've always perceived like what I'm saying, people would want to hear it. And then what came to me was that might not be my job. Mm-hmm. My job might be to talk to the people who talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very recent to me. And that's why I ask, is it relative? Because where my nervousnesses have come from professionally has not been talking to people. It's been talking to the current people that I currently work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pursuing that for a significant amount of time. Can I get at the high? I would always ask myself, I always wanted to be, whether it's performance coach or mental skills coaching, I always wanted to be, and still do want to be, I've always wanted to be the best performance coach in the professional sports industry. Mm-hmm. I've always pursued that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and then by pursuing that, I pursued, okay, well then that means I have to work with the best performers on the planet.
Right.
And I've pursued that my entire adult life.
So how come you're not the performer?
I was the performer.
Right.
And then I wanted to work with the performer.
Yep. And it sounds like you're saying you're not the performer because you're meant to coach.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's why I think it's relative. That's why I asked if it's relative. Because it, and I'm not saying that's how it has to be. Maybe I'm someone who speaks to large scale, but that has been really recent to me. And it's been like, maybe I've been thinking about this differently. Maybe that's who I'm supposed to work with. Maybe that's how part of my voice is being shared. Because I think a lot of times when you want it, I think one of the things that you and I both share is the whether it's irrational or not, but it's changing the world. Mm-hmm. And I've had that in me since I was like a little boy.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And I think that's what's been coming to me recently. I'm not sure. This is the first time I've really thought about this outside of my wife and my journal and sharing this with you. And that's why I bring it back to, is it relative? Because I'm not sure if it is or isn't, but that has been happening to me recently. because now I'm working at the level in which I've always envisioned.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm seeing, okay, there's parts of my game I gotta get better at. I got to do this and I got to do that. And I got to keep going. I got to keep going. And I do think I'm really talented and skilled at what I do. And I think that's why I'm doing what I do. But that's been flipped on me. And it's like, maybe this is what I'm supposed to really be good at.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe something through me works as a vessel. And maybe I'm not supposed to be the voice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a difference between Yoda and Luke. And so people do have different roles. And I don't know, I'm just bringing this back to characters, because in stories like movies, the characters are so exaggerated and oversimplified that they present it to us and it becomes obvious. And then in real life, it's all confusing and complex. We aren't oversimplified, exaggerated characters. We might play characters in different roles in our lives, but nobody hands us a script and says, okay, this is your job for the next, 90 minutes or something like that. Yeah. Or 90 years.
Well, can I ask that question again directly? Do you think that the tightrope is relative? Like, do you think that me walking on the top of the 200,000 feet up, do you think that was what? Because I have felt those same fears my whole time. And maybe that's because I had envisioned those fears of I was going to be the person who stood at the podium and talked to a 5,000 person room.
I don't know if that's vulnerability for you.
Okay.
It is for me. Like, I know I'm really good at it.
Yeah, you're very talented at it.
Thanks. People tell me that. Like, I've stopped, I watch all my stuff and I want to get better, but people say that you're really good at that. So, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Like, I'm still freaking nervous every time I go up on stage. So, and it's also the way you do it. What I learned was, you want to make a connection to the audience, you got to drop your defenses. You cannot connect through defensiveness, So, got to be vulnerable. I don't know what vulnerability is for you. But when you say, is that tightrope relative? I think whatever that vulnerability is, that's where I want you. That's where I want to see you go.
Yeah, heck yeah.
If it's a huge audience, then great. There's probably something there just by the way that you have been talking about it. There's probably something about you performing that is vulnerable. But I don't know. I haven't crawled inside your skin and said, what's that like?
Yeah, it's just it's a thought experiment that I'm working through. And listening to you, I think those are all similar aspects, because when I made to the big leagues of wanting to change the world, I think the best thing that came out of me coaching in Major League Baseball for a few years was and I know it's a classic cliche, but it really did change me.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
How could it not?
Right. But that was the beauty. So when I look at the 10-year path of 6 of it was trying to get there, 4 of it was being there, and then 10 years is wrapped in a bow, and it's like, what'd you learn? It was the paradox. And it was like, I went there as this person. I came out as the person I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I maybe didn't change the world the way I thought I was supposed to, but maybe I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's worth it. Just the contemplation of it was worth it.
Yeah. Although the world is changing. And I think you were part of that. Like, I know people who have come to me because you have directed them. Their lives are changing. And I know that they have families and that their children are seeing how they are handling it. I think there is a ripple effect. Just because you want to change the world doesn't mean you have to do it all at once.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why I like listening to you talk, because you've even packaged stories of 3 decades, and you've carried, and I think that's why I'm really, really into like what you're saying in this very moment. Obviously, I really like what we're talking about and just the fact of what we're generating through the energy of this conversation. Yeah. But hearing you and just listening to you and thinking about it. There's a part in the Bible where Paul's talking to Timothy at the end where he's saying, I fought the good fight. I've finished the race. And I'd heard that quote my entire life. And then I went on a Bible journey over the last year and just read the Bible. I just like put my head down into it and I was like, I'm going to do this. And it's fascinating because I started reading that and I got all the way to that verse, but I had now read all the books leading up to that verse. So then the verse carried a significant amount of weight in comparison to what it had carried my entire life. The verse I was not new to. I'd heard that multiple times. But the thing that dropped me, and the Bible had a lot of moments that really did this to me, but the thing that dropped me in that specific moment was I started asking myself the ability to sustain such a mission until I die.
Yeah.
And the day that I die, have I finished the race? And that changes your perspective because then you know tomorrow is just another, it's today. And then tomorrow is another today.
Yep.
And the pursuit of withstanding that forever. And what I liked, you said this earlier, and one of the things I am so passionate about health personally and then teaching is because the only way in my understanding to sustain the potential of you saying that on the day you die is to be healthy. And being healthy in the modern world is really difficult.
I watched my mother die of dementia. My father, I don't know, he was ambivalent about his health. One Thanksgiving, he was like, I have 4 different types of cancer, and the only question is which one is going to kill me first. My father was a narcissist, like diagnosed. And so he announces this at Thanksgiving, because he wants to be the center of attention. None of them killed him. He laid down one day and he said, I'm done. And he didn't wake up. And I know this for a fact because he decided to die on my mother's birthday.
Wow.
Right? Like my father was a very powerful, like mentally, incredibly powerful man. And he was in ill health. He'd had pneumonia. He'd had UTIs. Like it was no fun, but he could have hung on there.
Yeah.
And then, now my mother was already passed away, but he laid himself down and he said, you know what? Screw her. I'm going to make this my day. He turned her birthday into his death day.
Yeah.
Which is, what would you expect from a narcissist?
Yeah.
The point being, there is a will to be healthy. Like he thought his health was his doctor's responsibility.
Sure.
And I remember him telling me that. And that's not going to sustain you. You can't outsource this. You want to make America healthy again? You got to start by making yourself healthy again. We are all responsible for ourselves and our own health, regardless of what kind of medical establishment we have or who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services or any of that stuff. So I work on the scale of the individual with machines, and machines can scale, but not on this health policy scale. I want to empower people to take charge of their own health and choose the health they want. My parents, they weren't so much into that.
So do you think that that's a lot of what you've been impacted by?
Yeah, I'm not over it. My parents met at Harvard University, super educated, right? Also, the epicenter of health misinformation. Nobody did more to advance like these false ideas about cholesterol and diet and crap like that than Harvard University. And my parents believed it all. So we had, margarine instead of butter, for example. We had my mother counting calories her whole life and gaining weight the whole entire time. We were metabolically unhealthy, nutritionally impoverished. It was bad. And it took me a long time to dig myself out of that hole of lies and misinformation. Yeah. So I'm still, you can tell I'm still kind of bitter about it there, Mom. What the hell is margarine?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I want to have one more thought, and then I want to just finish up with maybe touch on the book for a second. But, I said this to you earlier about the design, and I do believe we have free will too.
Yeah,
But,
I'm glad.
yeah. But I think that a lot of our free will comes from the unconscious environment. So if I were to have free will over free will, if that can make sense, I've always challenged myself to have free will over influencing the environment around me or that I'm in. And I know that this can be a common thing if you're the closest to people that you're close to. And I've seen that since high school, of just like
Yep.
natural conformity, popularity, how jokes work. Like I understand that from like a behavioral psychological sense. But I've also there is a 100% reason why we moved into this house for the summer, and it's because of the trees. And that's by design. I'm very adamant about that. And I believe in that wholeheartedly, because I know that if I'm in trees or I'm in a wood burning sauna, I can hear it. If I'm in a great cold tub, or I'm in a creek, or if I have breath work, if I have practices, if I eat well, whatever, all these practices. But to me, it's surrounded by nature and what I see, because I know that I'm not consciously strong enough to make decisions all day.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and so
Decision fatigue.
beautiful. So that if I can have the ability to have my environment work for me, then I have the opportunity to be more in that field of the frequency where my antennas can be. And I love the potential of what could happen of my thoughts. And so I preference that while asking you as an engineer, when you see the world through design and you see the infrastructure of cities and you see, we can keep it there, but then understanding, also having this deep understanding of nature, this deep connection to health, also an entrepreneurial creative mind, also science, all about, you got all these things that you've acquired. When you see the world today through your lens, through the engineer lens, with also this core connection to health, I don't want to ask the simple question I want to ask is like, do you think we can reverse it? Like, I want to say that.
I know we can.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I'm for certain.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's the
so.
question.
I'm the kind of person who believes everything is figure outable, and I could be wrong, right? But this is what's gotten me through my life. Everything is figure outable. If you can formulate the problem, you can find the solution. Now, that's an act of faith. Like, I can't falsify that hypothesis, right? But how the hell else am I supposed to go through my life if you descend into this kind of nihilistic view that we have no agency? Then you're just telling yourself a victim story.
Nice.
And this gets back to free will. The victim story doesn't serve anybody. It's a miserable way to live a short life. Viktor Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, you can choose what it means to you. This is really deep stuff. Maslow wrote out this hierarchy of needs. While Viktor Frankl was in a death camp in Nazi Germany because he was Jewish, Maslow was in the United States, and he was writing papers. He started his career as a sex researcher. And in 1943, he published his famous Hierarchy of Needs. And at the time, everybody thought that you needed to start at the bottom, and only after satisfying basic security and safety, food, shelter, could you move up to self-esteem, sense of belonging, and what's at the top, self-actualization. Frankl flipped all that. When Frankl got out of the death camps and he was alive, he reconstructed some ideas that he had beforehand and interpreted them through his experiences in the death camps. There's something even higher than self-actualization, and it's meaning. It's a meaningful life. And so this is what Frankl wrote about. Whereas Maslow's self-actualization was terrific for the baby boomers. The army slogan, be like all you can be. It's all about you, right? Frankl was like, no, you derive meaning from some higher purpose. You dedicate yourself to something larger than yourself. Well, Maslow eventually said, it's not a hierarchy that goes in order like this. It's actually all mixed up, because Frankl showed that man could suffer any deprivation as long as he had a reason why. And the reason why exists at the top of the hierarchy. So you transit through Maslow's hierarchy, up, down, all over the place. It's not like you scaffold from the bottom up. When it comes to free will, you can talk about, we're just like moist robots, and, we do according to our stimulus. Now, I'm a Frankl guy. There is a space, and in that space, you can make meaning of your experience, because you can choose to invent meaning. And that is a creative act. All of the other things, motivation, agency, creativity, they come out of the meaning you choose to make out of your experience. So I know we have free will. As long as we get to, decide what something means, then all of these other sort of cascading actions will result from the meaning we choose to make. Because we're human, we make meaning through stories. Sometimes it's a social construction, we'll make it together. And sometimes it's in our imagination where we're like sitting there trying to figure something out. Especially children will make meaning even. They got to, because they're not ready to descend into some like constant state of apathy or some crap like that. Yeah.
We brought it all the way.
Yeah, right. We're back to free will. Yeah.
Well, let's wrap on just drop about the book you just launched out.
So there's Uncommon Testosterone is the book. I wrote a book called Uncommon Cold because I had so many articles, and they're all available free online. But I needed to collect my thoughts and put Morozko on a strong scientific foundation. So I put it all together in this book, Uncommon Cold. The title is kind of an inside joke that relates to COVID because, it's cold.
Yeah.
All right. Well, one of the most popular aspects.
I did not know that.
Right? Yeah. It's an insider.
Yeah,
right?
That's good. That's good.
When Joe Rogan read my stuff about testosterone, that became like the focal point of ice baths, and it still is. Some stupid Washington Post article came out the other day. New study says ice baths don't work. Asinine. The new study was from 2015.
Sure.
They're doing their ice baths after their exercise, which nobody who wants to build muscle does. And when they said work, they were only looking at muscle gains. So this stuff still persists, but testosterone was the most popular aspect of the Uncommon Cold book. So I said, okay, there's more for me to learn there. I'm going to do a deeper dive. I'm going to write a separate book, and this one I'm going to put up on Amazon, and it's going to be called Uncommon Testosterone. Testosterone synthesis originates in the mitochondria. All the theories about why testosterone is low, they all overlook mitochondria. It's terrible. Testosterone's low because of porn. Testosterone's low because toxic masculinity culture. Testosterone's low because men play too many video games or whatever. It's all bullshit. Testosterone is low because mitochondria are in such sorry condition. The seed oils, the light hygiene, the carbohydrates and processed food. Right. So once you know that, how do you fix low T? Mitochondrial therapies. And what's the best? I mean, there's a lot of good nutritional ones, but an ice bath is the best way to stimulate mitobiogenesis. So this book is like 225 pages or something with like 250 scientific resources. There's been a lot written about testosterone, and it finally makes sense to me because I wrote it. In there, you want to know about boron and testosterone, or vitamin D and testosterone, or DAA. Those things are in there too. They all relate to the mitochondria. So Ben Greenfield's in the book. Nice. I sent him a copy. He read it. We just did a podcast on it. There seems to be a lot of curiosity about testosterone, and I'm coming to the conclusion that TRT is oversubscribed. It works, but I'd rather that men and women tried therapies that target the mitochondria first. Try an ice bath. Try getting the seed oils out of your diet. Yeah. Try improving your...
Go to the root, basically, is what you're...
Yeah, exactly. Right where the testosterone is made, So
that's beautiful.
That's what that book is for. I had testosterone in like the mid 700s, which any doctor these days would say, oh, you're doing great. You're in your 50s. You should be glad, right? But I had an elevated PSA, so that's prostate-specific antigen. I didn't want to get that thing removed. I wanted to keep my prostate. I started doing ice baths because I was scared I was going to die of cancer, and got my PSA way down, which is great. My testosterone shot up. That was the whole thing, like sort of accidental discovery. That's how Rogan found out about it. And so the book grew out of that one experience and that one article. We now have several documented case studies. We even have negative case studies, people who started doing ice baths and they did not get an improvement in their testosterone. And like, here's the reasons why. This guy was on another medication that inhibits
Yeah.
testosterone production. This guy was on TRT for 3 years and his gonads have atrophied. Like reasons why it
That's
wouldn't work.
badass that you have that in there.
It's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I didn't bring one up for you.
No.
Okay. But
We've
we're gonna
talked
get one
about
towards-
yeah. I mean, we got
Yeah.
a long stretch ahead of us.
That's right. Okay.
Well, how can where are you at? I know you're on the socials, and we'll put it on there
Yep.
too. But just for people to listen, here, where are you at?
So the book is on Amazon. You can buy Uncommon Cold.
Okay.
Sorry, the Uncommon Testosterone book is on Amazon. You can buy Uncommon Cold at morozkoforge.com. And you can read everything that I have ever written on these topics at Morozko Forge for free. You don't have to buy the book, although it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I have a Substack, seagertp.substack.com. If you want to read about relationships and trauma and resilience and epigenetics, go to Substack because it's not all about the cold plunge therapy. And of course, I'm on Twitter or X or whatever Elon wants to call it, Seager TP there, and on Instagram.
All right, man. Hey, this was cool.
I'm glad.
Special night. I'm happy this worked out, brother.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
It's been terrific.
Yeah. Cheers to the marks. Enjoy the evening.
All right.